36% of Americans who take DNA tests are surprised by the results. 16% change how they think about their racial or ethnic identity. 3% discover their father is not their biological father. And millions more learn that the family stories they grew up with, the Cherokee princess, the Mayflower ancestor, the pure bloodline, were never true. But here's the thing. A lot of those families are still defending those stories. The DNA results are in. The family roots are being quietly destroyed. And nobody wants to talk about it. Ancestry testing is no longer a quirky hobby or a holiday gift. With more than 27 million Americans already in the Ancestry DNA database, the collision between family legend and genetic fact has become a fixture of everyday life. The numbers alone are staggering. 36% of test takers say the results surprised them. For 16%, the shock runs deeper. Their sense of racial or ethnic identity is changed. These aren't just statistics. They signal the unraveling of stories that once held families together. At the Thanksgiving table, DNA results drop like grenades, setting off arguments over who we really are and what we're willing to admit. It's not just about learning a new fact. It's about watching the story you were raised on start to fall apart, sometimes in front of your own parents and siblings. Yet even as evidence piles up, printed out, color-coded, impossible to ignore, families double down. The old stories get louder. The question isn't whether DNA is rewriting American identity. It's why so many people keep defending a myth after the truth is staring them in the face. The Cherokee princess story sounds like a badge of honor, but for many families it was a shield, one built out of fear. In the Jim Crow South, the one-drop rule turned a hint of black ancestry into a social sentence. Claiming a noble native ancestor offered a safer, even glamorous, alternative. It was easier to say a great-grandmother was Cherokee royalty than to admit she might have been classified as colored on a census or marriage record. The legend protected families from the harshest consequences of segregation, even as it erased the truth. But DNA doesn't care about family pride. Modern genetic tests routinely come back with 0 Native American markers, and instead show clear evidence of West African roots, sometimes 10%, sometimes much more. Still, the story survives. The Cherokee princess myth lets families sidestep the pain and stigma of America's racial history. It's not just a harmless tale, it's a strategic silence, a way to keep the real story buried no matter what the science says. Black Dutch. 2 words that sound harmless, almost quaint, but for generations they worked like a smokescreen. Families in the South and Appalachia would quietly pass down this label, never quite explaining what it meant. It wasn't a real ethnic group, and it wasn't a language or a country. It was a way to sound European while sidestepping the question of why an ancestor's skin was darker or their features didn't fit the local mold. The phrase let people hover in a safe, undefined space, neither black nor white, neither outsider nor fully accepted. That ambiguity was the point. It kept questions at bay and let families blend in, even as the real story stayed unspoken. But DNA testing cuts through that fog. Instead of confirming a vague Dutch or German heritage, the results often reveal a mix of African, Native, and European ancestry, proof that the story was never about geography, but about survival. Still, the label survives. Ambiguity feels safer than a hard truth, especially when that truth means rethinking everything you believed about who you are. When the old shield finally cracks, many families reach for the next defense. If you can't blur the line, try to claim a more impressive one. Pure bloodline. It's a phrase that sounds scientific, even noble, a family's claim to unbroken ancestry, always European, always clean. But underneath, it's a performance. At reunions and dinner tables, people parade their so-called pedigree as proof of legitimacy and belonging, a way to set themselves apart from the crowd. We're Mayflower descendants, or our line never mixed, become shields against the messiness of real history. The fantasy is seductive because it promises clarity in a world built on blurred lines. But DNA testing has no patience for these old hierarchies. Instead of confirming a pristine lineage, the results often reveal a jumble: West African, Native, Ashkenazi Jewish, or simply a long string of unknowns. The documentary proof that societies like the Mayflower descendants demand, birth records, marriage certificates, death notices for every generation, is missing for most families. Without it, the story falls apart. Yet families cling to the idea of purity, not because the evidence is there, but because the alternative means accepting that their identity is built on mixture and uncertainty. The refusal to let go isn't about facts. It's about defending a sense of worth that the myth once gave them. A DNA test doesn't just redraw the family tree, it can split the roots right at the kitchen table. Baylor College of Medicine estimates that 3% of families discover a non-paternity event. The man who raised the child isn't the biological father. That's not a footnote. That's hundreds of thousands of families forced to face a secret nobody planned to share. The shock lands hardest in the middle of ordinary life: a father, a child, and a stranger who suddenly shares half the genome. The science is cold and precise: segment matches, centimorgans, parent-child thresholds. But the fallout is raw. Some families try to separate biology from love. The line from NBC says, "My dad is my dad. I don't have to have a relationship with the other guy," says what so many feel. The person who taught you to ride a bike, who showed up at every game, who tucked you in at night, that's your parent, no matter what the test says. But denial isn't just about comfort. It becomes an act of loyalty, a way to defend the story that made your family make sense. To admit the DNA means risking the erasure of the parent you've always known. And so, the secret gets buried deeper, even as the evidence sits on the table in black and white. The search for legitimacy now shifts away from genes, turning back to the old proofs: names in a Bible, faded birth certificates, a paper trail that promises something DNA can't erase. Mayflower descent has always been the gold standard for American pedigree, a claim passed down with pride, not just in family stories, but in legal documents and society rosters. The General Society of Mayflower Descendants does not care about family legend or DNA matches. It demands a paper trail. Every name, every birth, every marriage must be traced, signed, and certified from the present day all the way back to 1620. Yet the deeper you go, the thinner the evidence gets. Autosomal DNA, the kind most Americans use for ancestry tests, breaks down after just 6 or 7 generations. By the time you reach the Mayflower, the genetic link has usually faded below 7 centimorgans, so faint it is invisible to even the best testing companies. That is why, for all the talk of genetic proof, Mayflower descent is a matter of paperwork, not science. Genealogist Diane Southard tells the story of a family who clung to their Mayflower claim for 80 years after the records failed to back it up. The myth outlasted the evidence because it was never about biology. It was about inherited nobility, an identity too precious to surrender, even when the facts ran out. For many, the story is worth more than the truth on any certificate or test result. A DNA kit doesn't just question where your ancestors came from. Sometimes it detonates the story of who you are. With every new person who spits in a tube, the odds rise that someone's oldest secret will surface, whether they want it or not. The algorithms don't care about family promises or buried paperwork. When 2 users share enough DNA, over 2,200 centimorgans, sometimes more, the system flashes a warning: close relative, parent, child, sibling. Suddenly, years of silence collapse under a number on a screen. It happens quietly, but the aftershocks are seismic. A woman logs in to check her ethnicity estimate and finds a stranger listed as her brother. A man, adopted as a baby, searches for medical history and instead uncovers a half-sibling who was never told he existed. In one Time magazine account, the words land like a verdict. The results changed everything I had ever understood about myself. This isn't just a fact to absorb, it's a rupture, a biography torn open, the old story wiped out in a single click. For families, the silence isn't random, it's a defense. The truth threatens love, memory, or the fragile peace built on a lie. Admitting the secret means rewriting every photograph, every bedtime story, every birthday. So the old story stays, guarded by shame or by love, even as the DNA sits in the database, waiting for someone to ask the wrong question. The damage isn't just in the secret itself, but in the years spent living inside a frame that was never real. Denial is now a family tradition, one more powerful than DNA. As 27 million Americans feed their secrets to the database, the stories get louder, the truths get lonelier. The choice isn't just what to believe, it's what to defend when your own blood tells you you're wrong.